On today's show, let's talk to Ben Beecken of Locked On Wolves to talk about the Timberwolves. What is the key to Anthony Edwards' success so far this season? How has the Timberwolves offense been better? And we'll talk about more about how they match up with the Mavericks in today's Locked On Mavs.
I'm Luka Doncic, and this is Locked On Mavericks podcast.
Mavericks, NBA champions. Bang! It's good, and the Mavericks have won the game.
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
Loyalty never fades away.
And welcome. You are locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and NBA channel manager for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for being part of the show, making Locked On Mavs your first listen today. With the best way you can help us grow the show is to listen every day on any podcast platform, like the video on YouTube, comment anything below. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Joining me today is Ben Beecken of Locked On Wolves. We'll talk about everything on the Timberwolves side of things. We'll talk about how they match up. We'll talk about how they've changed this season. Get into all that. Let's talk to Ben Beecken of Locked On Wolves right now. All right, welcome in. I'm Nick Angstadt from Locked On Mavericks. This is Ben Beecken from Locked On Wolves. Western Conference Finals. We're back. One of us was here more recently than the other one, but we're both back in the conference finals.
Back is really relative. Yeah.
Back, bringing back, 2004, bringing back skinny jeans and bringing back Clip-Its and Tamagotchis. We can bring back all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves today. I'm going to ask Ben Beecken a bunch of questions. He is the leading expert on the Timberwolves. And I'm going to start here. Anthony Edwards is just the darling of the league right now. Everybody is excited for him, loving him. He gives us great quotes.
Bring gas.
And where has he grown the most this season? How has he vaulted into this potentially top 10 player in the NBA category?
Yeah, I think the easy answer is defense. That's the one that everybody wants to talk about. But watching him every single game, I think it's actually the playmaking and the decision making. And if you watch the entire Nuggets series, there were moments where that wasn't perfect, but again, it's the second round of the playoffs. It's a really good defense, the defending champions in the second round of the playoffs. And we're talking about a 22-year-old. And by and large, he handled what they were throwing at him really well. And going back to the Phoenix series in round one, when the Wolves swept the Suns, I mean, Phoenix was legitimately putting 2+ like a half, basically 3 on the ball. Like they were essentially dedicating 3 guys to guarding Anthony Edwards, and he was still making the right read the vast majority of the time. And you go back to this time, or I guess not this time, a little more than a year ago, end of the regular season into the playoffs last season when he was 21, and he was starting to show signs of understanding that. And then it kind of came and went this year during the regular season. But obviously playoff defenses and adjustments are different than what you see in the regular season. But we started to see signs that, hey, Ant's understanding this playmaking thing. It's more than just, hey, they're going to send 2, so I'm just going to like immediately or I'm going to let the double come, and then I'm going to make a late pass to somebody else, and then the defense has time to recover and rotate, etc. And he's now starting to move quicker. And we've seen moments like, when the Nuggets won 3 in a row in the middle of the second round series, there were moments where Ant wasn't moving quick enough. The decisions weren't coming fast enough. But for the most part, that's been the biggest improvement. He's always, I shouldn't say always, for the last couple of years, he's been a good on-ball defender. The off-ball defense is what's hasn't always been great. He's gone from good to great as an on-ball defender this year. I truly believe like you could make an argument for an all-defensive team for him. He's not going to be on it, but like he's that good on the ball, and people that don't watch Wolves regularly don't realize it. But I mean, he's going to guard Kyrie Irving in the series. We could talk more about that, but he's a really good on-ball defender. It's some of the off-ball stuff. Can he stay engaged the whole time? But for me, the playmaking is the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because I think that's what separates Luka from an Anthony Edwards or somebody like that, especially on offense. And it separates him from a lot of different players. It separated him from SGA in the last round, where Luka just has every offensive option in front of him, and he can make every pass out of any place that he wants to go. And Anthony Edwards, to start developing that, I think that's what takes you from, all-star, all-NBA to top 5 MVP candidate player.
To be clear, he's not like at Luka's level in terms of playmaking, but that to me is the biggest improvement from year 3 to year 4 or whatever for Ant is that he used to be tunnel vision, and teams weren't putting 2 on the ball with him because they didn't need to a couple of years ago. But now he's realizing that like, hey, I have to trust my teammates. And he always has. He's never been, quote unquote selfish player, but he's learning now that the right read sometimes is to be selfish and sometimes is to make a quick decision.
Well, he was asked, "Do you want to win Game 7 for Mike Conley recently?" And he said, "No, I want to win it for myself." So I don't know if we can go fully, completely unselfish player.
And that's classic Ant, where he just like the first thing that comes in his mind, like, and he also like he keeps saying, Cat keeps saying like, 9 years haven't been, out of the first round of the playoffs, and Ant keeps saying, F those 9 years, like,
F your 9 years.
Yeah, and it's like for Wolves fans, everybody's like, hey, it's more than 9 years, it's 20 years for us, and Ant is just like, it's so. I don't know that pure is the right word, but it's unfiltered, right? It's whatever pops into his mind, and so he's immediately thinking like, of course I want to win. Like, and they said at the beginning of the playoffs, they said all the right stuff. Mike Conley gave his speech right before the playoffs of like, hey, do this for me sort of a thing. I haven't been to the conference finals since I was, in my mid 20s, and I haven't been back since that whole thing. So yeah, I mean, Ant's one of a kind.
There's something kind of like freeing though about it happened with Luka, where the Mavs, they weren't bad for that long, but they were kind of in this like mediocrity, like churning in mediocrity, and then they were bad for a couple years, and you're like, man, the end of Dirk, and you just felt like, okay, when are we gonna get out of this? And all of a sudden Luka's just like, I'm coming in, and like, I don't really know what you guys have been through in the past, but this is my era right now. And to have somebody to actually literally say that, like, F those 9 years, or F the 20 years you had before, this is new, like, to reestablish a culture like that, I think is wild that Anthony Edwards has done that already. And you can see it, like, you can see it with the Anthony Edwards Cat post game, where the Cat's still trying to like hold on to what was before, and Anthony Edwards is like, no, like, we're here now, like, let's do this now, stop fouling, just like.
Well, yeah, and Cat also had that, the comment, the same post game presser after the Game 7 win over the Nuggets, where he said, he was asked a question, I'm obviously paraphrasing, everybody's seen it, I'm sure at this point, like, hey, basically, what makes you think your time is now? Like, why couldn't you just wait another year, sort of a thing? And he was like, what do you mean? We've lost a lot. We lost last year. We lost 2 years ago.
Like, don't they have to lose more before? Don't you have to lose more in the big moments until you? Yeah.
Well, and it's a little bit of like, you don't know what you don't know. You're, and obviously the Wolves keep being called this young team, and of course their best player is Anthony Edwards, and he is extremely, like, painfully young for as good as he is, as far as this team's already gotten. But the rest of the team isn't all that young. Like, Jaden McDaniels is the same draft class as Anthony Edwards, but everybody else is in their prime or older for the most part. So, it counts when your best player is your youngest player, but it's just funny because, like, you got a guy like Cat who's been in the league forever, guys like Conley who have been around forever and have not had, consistent success deep into the playoffs. So it's this interesting dichotomy to have somebody like Ant be the leader of the team.
Yeah. The Timberwolves, by the way, I had to go look this up because I really wanted to know, because it was a big conversation in the Thunder series. Timberwolves, 368 playoff games in their top 9 rotation. Mavs, 303 playoff games. So the Timberwolves actually have like a lot more playoff experience than the Mavs. I guess not a lot more, but a good deal more. I also was thrown off by Mike Conley has played 88 playoff games, and Kyrie Irving's played 86 playoff games. Like, the Conley had played more playoff games than Kyrie kind of threw me off too.
And I guess Kyrie was on those Cavs teams before LeBron got there, right? So, like, that's probably
they didn't go to the playoffs at all.
Yeah.
And he's been injured out, all those different things with Kyrie, but their offense for the Timberwolves, I think this is a big thing for them. They were 16th in the regular season. They've been much better in the playoffs. Their offense actually got better in the playoffs, which doesn't really happen that much. They were 116 points per 100 possessions in the regular season. Now they're like 117 points per cleaning the glass. How's the offense improved going into the playoffs now?
I think it's just better and quicker decision making from Ant, and that's where it starts. And then from there, it's and they've gone through fits and starts with this, but role players making open shots, and there certainly were moments where that didn't happen. I mean, Nickeil Alexander-Walker was awesome against Phoenix, and he had a couple of offers, including in Game 7 against Denver. He was like 0-5, 0-6 from outside the arc. But I think overall, it's been the quicker decision making, and it's weird. Like that has been the thing for the Wolves all year, is the offense hasn't been consistent, because they go through these like my turn, your turn stretches where it's Cat's offense, then it's Ant's offense, and they don't really have a consistent flow. And Chris Finch has been really resistant to like truly structured offense, and like coming out of Ryan Saunders and going further back, Flip Saunders, who had like a massive playbook. This is Chris Finch literally describes it as putting bumpers on, like bumpers as if you're bowling, and just letting it happen. Wow. And that was how he described it earlier in the year. And I think they've gotten a little bit more direction with how they want to go offensively. And Mike Conley is certainly a big part of that. But he just kind of lets things let the game kind of dictate what's happening, and there's very few and that to Wolves fans have been going crazy about it all year when the Wolves have hit they actually didn't lose 3 in a row all season until the Denver series. Like literally did not have a losing streak beyond 2 games. So it's not like the rough patches there haven't been a lot of them, but when the offense has struggled, it's been like, hey, why don't they call a couple of actual plays? But what it ends up being is Anthony Edwards, Rudy Gobert pick and roll. It ends up being, secondary break out of transition, trying to get a good shot. I think they've done a really good job of just knowing, hey, teams are going to send 2 at Ant. And like early in the Denver series, they did it. They were trying to guard him straight up with KCP. They were trying to guard him straight up at times with Aaron Gordon, who fared a little bit better than KCP. I think size has tended to do better than athleticism against Anthony Edwards because he's just more athletic than pretty much anyone that's ever going to try and guard him.
Yeah, right.
But he beat both those guys individually. And so then they went to more of what Phoenix tried to do, which was let's put 2 on the ball, 2+ on the ball, and let's heavily, kind of shade to the strong side. And Ant, they lost 3 in a row. He struggled for a little while with it and obviously didn't shoot the ball well in game 7, but he started making quicker decisions. And then from there, once you've got a defense in rotation and scrambling, most defenses and Dallas, I know they're a little bit more athletic of a defense than Denver and have been better defensively over the last several weeks than Denver. Maybe does better with that. But I think for the Wolves, it's really just reading and reacting more quickly. And then it's those ancillary guys like the Jaden McDaniels. Mike Conley's pretty consistent, but Jaden would probably be one of the biggest ones in terms of consistency. Like as long as Cat's on the floor, we know what we're going to get from Cat. It's foul trouble. That's the issue with Cat. Rudy is going to have ups and downs, but he's pretty consistent in terms of he's there offensively. He has significant gravity and he matters. But is Jaden McDaniels going to make open threes? Is Nickeil Alexander-Walker going to make open threes? Is McDaniels going to actually want to pump fake and get to the basket? Those are the things that have happened more often than not in the playoffs. And combined with Anthony Edwards being a quicker decision maker, the Wolves have just continued to kind of steadily improve offensively, really throughout the course of the year.
Coming up, let's talk about the bigs. Let's talk about Gobert. How has he stayed on the court and improved his defense? How has Cat stopped fouling, or has he stopped fouling? We'll talk about that and more coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook has all kinds of props and odds that you can use to get in on the action. Check out what they have. Put down a $5 bet. You get $150 in bonus bets right now. Timberwolves -168 to win the series. Dallas Mavericks +142. So a little difference there between the two of them. Timberwolves are going in as the slight favorite there, and you can go check out all the other stuff they have. They also have the Western Conference Finals MVP, Anthony Edwards -150, Luka +165. So not a big difference there. Karl-Anthony Towns +1,400, Kyrie Irving +1,600, Gobert +5,000, PJ Washington standing on business at +12,000. If you're putting money on PJ Washington, you're probably related to him. Go check out FanDuel, see what's available for you. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Again, $5 down to get $150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us on Locked On Mavs, Locked On Timberwolves crossover. Talking about the offense, talking about Anthony Edwards, how he's grown, how the offense has changed for the Timberwolves. Let's talk about the bigs. How has Rudy Gobert improved and stayed on the court more in the playoffs, and how has he improved perimeter-wise defending? Because I think that's been one of the big keys for him.
Yeah, I think Rudy's always gotten a bit of a bad rap, and certainly one of those series against Dallas in past years when he was with Utah was part of that. I think it was Dallas and the Clippers that mostly exploited him playing 5 out. And certainly I think that's something we'll talk about. I think on the Mavs side of the show is how much the Mavs may play 5 out against the Wolves and what that looks like. But Rudy in space, it's obviously not ideal. It's not what the Wolves want. They'd much prefer him protecting the paint, but he can hold his own when he's put in space. And he did that against Phoenix actually more often than against Denver, because Phoenix would take Nurkic out of the game and play Durant at center, and Rudy had to guard in space. And he did okay doing that. Like, he's passable as a perimeter defender, believe it or not. And so defensively, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, the Wolves obviously will have the size advantage, which is going to be a bit of whiplash, I think, for the Mavs after Dallas had a clear size advantage, or at least a weight advantage over Oklahoma City. But I don't know. I think that to me is kind of one of the biggest things is can Rudy do enough to stay on the floor against a team that wants to play more on the perimeter versus pound the ball inside? Can he still provide that level of rim protection, which again, like it wasn't as much about Rudy guarding Jokic one-on-one as it was about what Rudy can do in a support role. And it's so impactful that's why he keeps winning Defensive Player of the Year, is because he can show up, come from anywhere on the floor and block your shot, or the never minds when people start to go into the paint. It's like, oh shoot, Rudy's here, I'm going back out. Like those, he leads the league in those for sure. I mean, it's him and Wembanyama, right? So I think defensively it's going to be, I'm curious to see how the Wolves match that up. I think depending on how small Dallas plays, and like, is it, I know Gafford was starting, but not playing like consistent minutes for this Mavs team. I think it was more Dereck Lively, the athleticism. How will the Wolves handle that? I think they've already shown they're not going to make a knee-jerk adjustment. Like at halftime of Game 7, Charles Barkley and everybody on Twitter was clamoring for them to bench Rudy Gobert. And then Rudy ends up being awesome in the second half and just completely, on both ends of the floor. And offensively, the Wolves really trust him. The players really, and that didn't happen last year. I mean, not to go like way too far back, but D'Angelo Russell did not trust Rudy Gobert, and Mike Conley does. They have a chemistry together, obviously, from their time in Utah. And, Anthony Edwards trusts Rudy enough, right? Enough to throw those lobs, to throw those pocket passes. And Rudy doesn't have the best hands in the world, but he does have gravity. And Chris Finch talks about that all the time, the gravity that Rudy Gobert has. And one of the big things that happened in Game 7 against the Nuggets was the Wolves got into the bonus quickly in the third and fourth quarter. And it's not because, they got a bunch of free throw attempts, but it's not because they were getting to the rim a bunch. It's not because the refs were making a bunch of bad calls in the Wolves' favor. It's because the Nuggets were trying to guard Rudy Gobert with Justin Holiday and, I guess not as much like Reggie Jackson and guys like that. Yeah. And they were just wrapping him up, and Gobert was making it clear that he was being fouled, and he got the Wolves into the bonus quickly. So no matter where he is on the floor, people know that Rudy's out there, and he has gravity to everything he does. And clearly that's going to be it always is one of the main kind of focal points of any series that Rudy Gobert is in, is like, will he quote unquote get played off the floor? And Dallas is one of the teams that this matchup will be like, how will the Wolves and Rudy handle it? We've asked that before, and Rudy has come through. And the biggest difference quickly between this Wolves team and those Utah teams is those Utah teams didn't have any perimeter defense. The Wolves do now. And Rudy was actually able to, if you go back and watch when he was guarding, whoever in the corner draining threes in the playoffs, he was contesting shots and recovering to the paint and still getting off passable contests in both places. And there aren't very many fives that can do that. But because the Wolves have arguably the Wolves or the league's best perimeter defense overall, they can, I think that they can leave Rudy on the floor and be much more successful than those Jazz teams were.
Yeah. And the size, not just relying just on 3-point shooting like those Jazz teams were. I think that helps them too. And I think that I counted on Luka playing Zubats off the floor in the first round, and Luka with the knee sprain, I think, was limited in doing that and couldn't play him off the floor as easily as he had in the past. We'd seen him for 2 playoff series, for literally 12 games, 13 games of the playoffs, play him off the floor over and over again. And it just didn't happen in the first round series like we thought it would. And so I think that is a little bit different than what we'd expect in the past.
And I'm curious to see how, I mean, obviously related to that, how Rudy plays the Luka lobs, the throwing those late lobs. He played the Jokic Gordon lob really well. And there was that clip, I think it was Game 2 when the Wolves dominated in Denver, and it was like contested a lob that just knocked it away. And it was like, has anyone ever done this before? And Luka's a bit of certainly different, but it's a similar type of play. And so no doubt, and Rudy's a very smart player. He's, he's going to be studying that and try and figure out. Now, as the series wore on, he was more and more just playing the lobs, and Jokic was able to get those kind of 10-foot floater push shots off. And so the Wolves will concede that. That's just kind of how they're built defensively. But can they at least make Luka think early in the series by like, hey, am I going to come out and contest this? Am I going to try and swat the shot back in your face, or am I going to play back and play the lob? And I think Rudy's one of the few guys in the league that has the capability to at least strike fear in the idea that, like, I could do either one of these things, and make you pause and make you guess what I'm about to do.
And the Mavs have played bigs. I mean, Maxi Kleber missed all the games in the Thunder series. He may come back for this series. He's been practicing and doing some things, and so we'll see if he comes back, but that's their key to playing 5 out against Gobert. And so the Mavericks playing bigs, I think, helps Gobert obviously stay on the court, but also still be effective in this series. And so really fascinated to see what happens with Gobert, but I'm also fascinated to see what happens with Towns. How did he stop fouling? What's been the key for him? I think he's the key to this whole series, the matchup between him and PJ Washington. So let's talk about them and how that plays out coming up. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Go check out Prize Picks and see what's available for you. All you have to do is go to prizepicks.com, pick more or less on the projections of 2 to 6 players, and you're not playing against a bunch of guys in their basement that just hang out and all they do is look up algorithms and things like that on how to make these plays. You're not playing against a whole pool of people where only one of them wins. You can win, and a bunch of people can win in this. Go ahead, see what they have for NBA right now. They have game 1 for the, let's see, do they have Dallas Mavericks stuff up yet? Yes, they do. Anthony Edwards, game 1, 28 points, more or less. Give me more for Anthony Eds. I'll take that one. Kyrie Irving, 21 points. More than that one, 21 points. He's got to be better than that. Luka Doncic, 28.5. Give me less, just slightly less than for Luka on that one. Gobert, 12.5 points. Give me less on that one as well. I put down, if you get all those to hit, put down $20, you can win 200. If I put down just $5, I can win $50 just to have some fun watching the game. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. If you use that promo code LockedOnNBA, you get a first deposit match up to $100. Prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Ben, we're talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves, talking about their side of this whole matchup. We'll do another episode where we talk about the Mavs side of it, and you'll ask me questions about them. And so check out on whatever feed you're listening to on Locked On Mavs or Locked On Wolves. Both episodes will be available. So, Karl-Anthony Towns, how did he stop fouling? Has that been the key for him, or has there been other things that have changed for Karl-Anthony Towns? Because it feels like he's slid into his role really well this year, when in the past that hadn't been the case.
Yeah, you mentioned him being potentially the key to the series, and that was certainly said in the Phoenix series because the Wolves kind of made it known, like, hey, we're going to put him on Kevin Durant and see what happens, pretty much, is what they said. And it worked out really well for the Wolves. And then he had to guard Nikola Jokic in the second round. And so, like, I think Cat is very likely one of the headliners in terms of keys for the series. And I think it starts in the last 2 series, it started on the defensive end. I think in this series, it may be more on the offensive end because I think this is a little bit of a lower scoring series, a slower pace series. We already talked about how both teams, arguably the 2 best defenses in the league right now. Well, of the final 4 teams, yes, the 2 best defenses, certainly. But over the last couple of months, the Wolves have been the best defense all year. So can Cat be effective offensively? And that's it's been consistently good in the postseason, but there's been moments where it's been better than others. He had a couple of lower scoring games earlier in the playoffs, but he was great. As the Wolves closed out the Nuggets in games 6 and 7, and fouling is always going to be a thing for Cat. I mean, even in there can't be a Cat game where it's like, this is a perfect game. It's never quite there. And that's the frustration, right? So like game 7 against the Nuggets, he played like 3.5 quarters of nearly perfect basketball. And then his 5th foul against Jokic was a dumb foul on the perimeter. Yes, it was ticky-tack. Yes, it's a call that easily could not have been made at all. But why put yourself in that position? And then he comes back in the game after Gobert fouls out, and he has a silly turnover. I think they were up 8, and then the Nuggets got the turnover scored, and they made it a 6-point game. Game was basically over at that point, but he would have been an all-time GOAT had it changed, right? And so it's stuff like that Cat can't seem to quit it. But if he's doing everything else right and he's getting an efficient, 20 plus and 10, 12 rebounds and being good defensively, I don't think his defensive assignment will be quite as daunting in this series against Dallas. But he's been really good.
As Jokic? I don't
right,
think,
yeah.
I don't think
yes. Jokic or Durant, right? Like 2 of the top 10 players in the league. But it's crazy because Cat, like the narrative on him has always just been bad defender. And that mostly was true for a while. But he wasn't like he's bought in completely. And Chris Finch talks about this all the time. Like nobody's made more sacrifices than Cat. This is a guy who's he was on multiple all-NBA teams before this season. And they just said, hey, you're going to change positions. You're going to have to guard on the perimeter. You're going to have to do all these different things. And he's done it. He guarded Kevin Durant and was good, did a good job. He was far better than anyone else. The Wolves tried to Nikola Jokic. And those are 2 very different players, but equally as potent offensively. And, in this series, it's going to be more about how does he play off of Ant. The Nuggets made the decision in game 7 to not double Cat at all. They were only doubling Ant. And so he was ended up with Christian Brown and Jamal Murray, and the Wolves were getting switches onto Cat, to get those smaller guys onto him. But then he would just go to work. And I think he shot like 8 of 14, just good decision-making. Like overall, I should should end this answer with like overall the decision making has been better. The dumb fouls have been less, and it helps that the ticky-tack calls don't happen as frequently in the playoffs, but they're still there. And so there certainly will be at least one game that the outcome is impacted because Cat picked up a dumb foul or, double whammy offensive foul. Like he's led the league multiple years in a row now in terms of percentage of his fouls that are offensive fouls, which are obviously a foul and a turnover. Like that's a very common Cat thing. I believe, and this is just by my memory, I think he's only gotten like 2 offensive foul calls all playoffs so far, across like 11 games, which is incredible. But in the regular season,
Tony
it's still very
Brothers
much an
games
issue.
have you had?
Well, yeah, that's fair. And actually, they probably were all from him. No, there just haven't been very many. And so he has improved, and he's showing real maturity.
He fouled out of 11% of the regular season games he played in this year. 7 of 62.
Yeah, and seriously, like I don't know what the number was this year, but I think it was maybe 2 years ago. The percentage of his personal fouls that were offensive fouls was like, it was more than a third of his personal fouls. Like Jeez. It was legitimately 30-something%, which is insane. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where like, the refs hate me. The refs, opposing teams are telling the refs to look out for, hey, watch, he's hooking, he's doing this, he's doing that. And he does do that. And he's not the only guy that does it, but now he's the guy that gets called the most because he just keeps doing it and the refs are looking for it. So that definitely will come up in this series.
Can you, for my audience, for the Locked On Mavs listeners, can you explain the Naz Reid love? Because the love that he has gotten from fans, like you just say, like I was hanging out with Sam Ekstrom this weekend and Reed Redmond, who are staff members with us, who are both Minnesota guys. We were watching the games together. You just say Naz Reid to them, and it just like immediately, like that's a thing that people do. You just say Naz Reid to each other. The love for him has gone crazy. Where did it start, and what is it right now?
Yeah, I mean, I can't explain the grassroots part of it. Like it really did take off, and it was probably toward the end of last year. And no doubt, like it played into the Wolves extending him. As weird as that sounds, like I don't doubt it at all. I really don't.
Can't lose Naz Reid.
Yeah, I mean, like I think it started because he was an undrafted guy. It was the Gerson Rosas regime. He was undrafted out of LSU. They originally brought him on the summer league team, almost immediately gave him a 2-way deal. And we're like, all right, we can't lose this guy. And then midway through summer league, they were like, nope, we're going to give him a partially guaranteed, like a legit, basically like a second round draft pick type of a deal. So they signed him to a 4-year partially guaranteed deal based on how he was performing in summer league. And he still was, he over the course of the next couple of years, he lost probably 40 pounds, I think is what was said. And he's become far better defensively. He always had a bit of a handle. He was part of the Jelly fam on the East Coast. Like he was always a handle guy, like a layups guy. But he lost weight, he got in shape, he improved defensively. And now it's just like the cult status in Minnesota is crazy. Like he's, there were like pizza restaurants that were putting him on their marquee, and like he was like getting like these just crazy. They did this beach towel giveaway where I'm sure people have seen this on social media, but literally the beach towel just says Naz Reid, period. And like Kenny Chesney ended up with it on stage at a concert recently. Like you name whatever touring artist comes to Minneapolis, they end up with the Naz Reid towel now, bringing him to Twins games. Like it's just a thing. And it's funny. I think it's just the undrafted story. People love an underdog story. And then the fact that he embraced being in Minnesota. And then he went from undrafted to now he got this big deal, the 3 years, $60+ million in the offseason to be a 6th man. And now he's the 6th man of the year. So, and we saw like he was not good in the first half of Game 7 against Denver. But then he had a 4-minute stretch, and I said this on Locked On Wolves. He was legitimately the best player on the floor for 4 minutes in a game that had Jamal Murray, Anthony Edwards, Nikola Jokic all on the floor, and it was like Naz block, Naz, foul on the other end, make free throws, Naz block, Jokic again, and then he comes down and gets a tip slam, like leading the break, like all of the above. He can do everything, and it's just the all-around game that fans appreciate. The fact that he embraces the state and the city of Minneapolis. Yeah, I mean, Naz Reid is absolutely a cult hero in Minnesota.
The Mavs made a run at him in the offseason too. If they had, I'm pretty sure if they hadn't done the Grant Williams thing, they would have done, or and the Timberwolves had moved on from Naz Reid, they would have.
I do remember hearing that Dallas was interested. Yeah, and that was a big topic. Like, are they going to pay him? I was worried about it. I was worried about what he might get. Yeah. And I talked about this on Locked On Wolves. Like, you can't pay somebody coming off the bench. You've already got max contracts with Rudy and Cat, but they ended up the price ended up being good, and I liked the deal when they got it because they could always pivot. Now, I don't think they're pivoting now that they're in the conference finals.
Yeah, when your towel is starting to be worn by Kenny Chesney, you can't pivot from that. Right? The last one, when Minnesota wins games, What happens when Minnesota loses games so far in the playoffs? What happens? Give me give me the short version, Ben.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it's weird because they didn't lose to Phoenix, and the 3 losses to Denver, at least 2 of them were pretty non-competitive. It was just a weird series where, like, of the 7 games, 4 to 5 of them were basically blowouts, and the other ones, there were no 1-possession games. They were like 7-9 point games. So they have to respond to the first punch. So if they get down early, or if they get up early and then, Dallas fights back and say they're down at the end of the first quarter in the first game, like the Wolves get out to a hot start, they're up 10-2, then they're down 24-22 at the end of the first quarter. They have to respond to that first punch. And if they don't quickly, then they can you can almost kind of see it. And they would obviously never admit this, but it's where it's like, we'll pack it in. We'll get them next time. And they just kind of they allow it to just kind of happen to them, and then it gets away. And they do sometimes let go of the rope. Obviously, it didn't happen in Game 7, but that tends to be a mentality that can kind of take hold for the Wolves. When they win, it's when I don't know. The defense is never really bad for the Wolves. It's really more about decisiveness in offense, where we started really this conversation.
Yeah, right.
Is because the offense isn't. They don't have it's frustrating for Wolves fans because Chris Finch was supposed to be this offensive guru. He coached Jokic his rookie year in Denver. He was in New Orleans with Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. He was in Toronto. He's been places where there's been good offenses and he's got a great offensive mind, but the offense lacks creativity, and it's really all about reading and reacting and going quickly. And even though they play at a slow pace, but the half court reads need to be quick. And, if they don't make quick decisions and they get stuck forcing the ball to Rudy because they're trying to, take advantage of a mismatch that's only kind of there, that's when they get stuck. But if they can make quick decisions, if Ant can, get off the ball quickly, if he remembers that, hey, if I pass out of this double, the ball's going to swing back and I'm not going to be double teamed anymore. Someone's going to get open shot, and it might be me on the rotation back to the other side. If they can make those quick decisions, they're really hard to beat. The defense might have one stinker in there. Every defense does, but they're not going to have 2. I mean, the defense is going to be good. It's all going to be whether or not the Wolves can score. And that starts with quick decision making. It starts with Anthony Edwards. And that to me is one of the biggest keys in this series.
That's the keys to the series. That's what we think about the Timberwolves side of it. The Mavs side of it will come out the next day. So if you're listening to this, or it's out right now, you can listen to a podcast whenever you want, apparently. So go check out that episode. Go listen to Locked On Wolves all throughout the series. Listen to Locked On Mavs all throughout the series. Guys, thanks so much for listening to both sides of the crossover, Locked On Mavs, Locked On Wolves.